Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I'll tell you what I do first, because it matters to understanding what I saw. I inspect underwater infrastructure, piers, seawalls, offshore platform foundations, underwater pipelines, anything that was built to exist below the surface and needs someone to go down and verify it's still doing that without falling apart. I've been doing it for 20 years along a stretch of the Gulf Coast. I dive, I look, I write reports. That's the whole job. It's physical work, and it's solitary work in the way that any work is solitary when the most important part of it happens somewhere nobody else can follow you. And I've always been fine with that. I'm not a complicated person. I don't need a lot from a day. My name is Welty. I'm 47 years old. I have a son named Reed who's 17 and lives with his mother 2 towns over and plays baseball and texts me more than he calls, which I've made my peace with because at least he texts. My surface partner is a woman named Lou who's been running my topside equipment and communications for 9 years. She handles the boat, monitors my dive computer, keeps track of my depth and time, manages the comm equipment that lets her talk to me while I'm down. We work together well in the way that people work together well when they've done something side by side long enough that they don't have to explain themselves to each other anymore. That kind of working relationship is rarer than people think, and I don't take it for granted. I'm telling you about Lou and Reed because they both matter to what happened, and I'm telling you about the work because the work is where all of it started. The morning the news reported that ocean levels had dropped 6 inches worldwide, my phone started going before I'd gotten through my first cup of coffee. Every coastal infrastructure client I had wanted emergency inspection dives. I understood why. 6 inches doesn't sound like much in the open ocean, but to a seawall or a pier foundation, it's a sudden pressure change, and sudden pressure changes reveal weaknesses that slow changes give structures time to adapt to. There's also the exposed section problem. Anything that had been submerged and was now sitting in open air for the first time was going to start behaving differently in ways that needed to be assessed before the water came back, if the water came back. I had a full week of dives booked by noon. The first thing you noticed along the coast was the smell. Low tide has a smell. Anyone who spent time near salt water knows it. That wet mineral smell of exposed tidal flat, seaweed and salt, and the particular sharpness of things that usually live underwater, briefly encountering air. It's not a bad smell. It's familiar. It smells like the coast. The smell after the drop was not that. It came from further down than tidal flat. From the band of newly exposed seafloor that ran along every beach and jetty and seawall I drove past on my way to the first job, a strip of wet dark bottom that had never seen daylight, covered in growth that had no business being in open air, white and pale and slow moving in the way that things move when they've never had to respond to wind before. The smell of that exposed strip was older than salt, older than the surface. It came from somewhere that air had never reached before that morning, and it sat in the back of my throat in a way I didn't have a category for. I did my first 2 days of dives and they were routine. seawalls with some new joint stress, a pier foundation with minor surface spalling from the pressure differential, nothing that constituted an emergency. I wrote my reports and moved on to the next job. The work was familiar, and the familiar was welcome. On the third day, I dove an offshore platform foundation about 4 miles out. I'd inspected that structure twice before and knew it well. Went down the platform leg the way I always do, checking connection points and welds in sequence, running my light along the steel, making notes in my head that I'd transferred to the report form when I surfaced. At the base of the leg, where the foundation skirt met the seafloor, I finished my check and let myself drift down to the bottom to look at the sediment contact. Standard practice. You want to see how the structure is sitting on the bottom, whether anything has shifted, whether the seafloor material around the foundation base is behaving the way it should. I hovered above the seafloor with my light on it, and something was wrong. I stayed there for a full minute trying to name it. It looked like seafloor, pale, flat sediment, the featureless sameness of it that I'd seen on the bottom of 100 dives. But it didn't feel right in the way that a floor feels right when it's solid under you. It felt like looking at a photograph of a floor, a surface that was presenting the idea of solidity without actually being committed to it underneath. I surfaced. Lou asked how it looked down there, and I told her the foundation was in good shape, and I wanted to flag some unusual sediment consistency around the base for the report. She asked me to grade the consistency, and I told her I wasn't sure how to grade it. She gave me the look she gives me when I'm being imprecise about something that needs to be precise. I told her I'd put unusual consistency in the report and we'd revisit if the client had questions. She let it go. That's Lou. 2 days later, I went back to the same platform for a follow-up, and I went to the seafloor again. I hadn't planned to. I finished my structural check, and I was ascending, and I went back down instead. I pressed my gloved hand flat against the sediment. It moved under my hand. Not the way sediment moves when you press into it, the way silt shifts and clouds and displaces outward. Not that. The surface gave slightly, a very small compression, and then pushed back. A give and return that had resistance behind it, the kind of resistance you feel from something that has a structure underneath the surface. And then it settled back to flat, and still like nothing had happened, and the water around my hand was as clear as it had been before. I pulled my hand away and ran my light across the surrounding seafloor in every direction my beam could reach. Same surface, same pale sameness in every direction. I surfaced and told Lou the sediment was soft out there, and I wanted to flag it. She asked, how soft? I told her I wasn't sure how to categorize it, and she gave me the same look as before, and I told her we'd call it unusual in the report, and she wrote it down without further comment. That night, I did something I don't usually do, which is sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and actually look into something that was bothering me instead of deciding it was above my pay grade and going to bed. I read about the worldwide drop. The public explanations were vague in a specific way, the kind of vagueness that happens when the people giving the explanations are being careful. Large-scale seismic activity, tectonic adjustment across multiple boundaries. Unprecedented, but not necessarily alarming, said one statement. I counted the word unprecedented across 4 separate statements from 4 separate scientific organizations, and I noted that not one of them said what it meant for something to be unprecedented, when what was unprecedented was the entire ocean moving at the same time. I found a forum thread from someone whose username suggested they worked in deep sea survey. They'd posted that bathymetric readings in several deep ocean basins had changed since the drop, that the floor profiles were different from previous surveys in ways that sediment movement and seismic shifting couldn't account for. The thread had 11 replies, most of them asking follow-up questions, and then the original post was gone, deleted. The replies were still there, quoting what had been posted, and I read them and closed the laptop. I didn't go looking for the thread again. I knew I'd find it if I looked, and I wasn't ready for whatever was attached to finding it. Lou mentioned before our next dive that her brother Pell had called her the previous night. She said it the way you mentioned something that's sitting with you, casually, but not really casually, while we were drinking coffee on the boat before going in. Pell worked on a deep-water research vessel out of Louisiana. Lou had mentioned him over the years the way you mention family members, occasionally, and with the specific fondness of people who don't talk much but mean it when they do. He wasn't a phone caller, she said, so she'd picked up when she saw his number. He wanted to know if she'd noticed anything unusual on our inspection dives since the drop. I asked her what kind of unusual he meant. She said his vessel had been doing seafloor surveys when the drop happened, and they'd had to cut operations short because their equipment was returning readings that didn't make sense. Not equipment failure readings, she said. Not the kind of reading that tells you something's wrong with the instrument. Consistent readings that were simply impossible for that location and depth. The seafloor in their survey area was registering as hollow. I put my coffee down. Hollow, she said, meant the signal was passing through the sediment layer and not returning from solid material below it. It kept going. Whatever was below the sediment layer in that area wasn't returning the signal the way bedrock or mantle material would return it. The signal went in and didn't come back. Pell had told his crew it was instrument error and moved the vessel to a different survey area. Lou said he didn't sound like a man who thought it was instrument error. I went on my next dive that afternoon, and at the bottom, I pressed my hand to the sediment again. I stayed there this time. Lou's voice came through my comm, asking if I was okay, and I told her I was fine, and I stayed where I was with my palm flat on the seafloor. Under my hand, so faint, I thought at first I was making it up. Something was moving. Not a current, not the ambient motion of water, a rhythm, slow and very deep, coming up through the sediment and into my palm and up through my wrist. My body figured out what to call it before my brain did. It filed it immediately, and without asking my permission, in the same category as feeling a pulse through someone's skin when you press 2 fingers to their wrist. The same category, not the same speed, not the same scale. Much slower, much larger, a rhythm coming up from below the floor of the ocean. I surfaced. I told Lou the foundation was sound and we should head in. She looked at me for a moment and then looked away and started on the equipment. I was grateful she didn't ask. That night, I called Reed and we talked for 20 minutes about baseball tryouts and a summer job he was thinking about applying for, and whether I thought a 2008 truck with high mileage was a good first vehicle, or whether he should save longer for something newer I stayed on the phone longer than I usually do. I didn't want to hang up. His voice was one of the most normal things I could access right then, and normal felt like something I needed to be careful with, to not use up all at once. I asked Lou to connect me with Pell directly. She texted him my number without asking me why, and he called 2 nights later. He was quieter than Lou. The same directness, but more deliberate about it. A man who chose words the way you choose tools, picking the right one before he started rather than sorting through them out loud. He told me about the hollow readings in more detail than he'd given Lou. He explained how the survey equipment worked, the signal it sent down, and what a normal return looked like from different types of seafloor material. What they'd gotten was a return that told them the sediment layer in that location was somewhere between 6 and 9 feet thick, and that below it was a space. Not rock, not mantle, a space. I asked him how big a space. He said the equipment couldn't determine that because the signal didn't come back from the lower boundary of it. It went through the sediment and into the space and didn't return. Either the space was deep enough that the signal degraded before it could bounce back, or whatever was below the sediment was absorbing the signal rather than reflecting it. He said both options had implications he didn't love. I asked him what he thought was down there. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't have an answer. The quiet of someone who's been sitting with an answer for a while and is deciding how to hand it to someone else without dropping it. He said he thought the seafloor was thinner than anyone had been assuming. Not in every location, he said, but in more locations than we'd surveyed carefully enough to know. And he thought that whatever was below it was large enough that large wasn't the right word for it, because large implied a size you could eventually walk around, and he didn't think that applied here. He said the 6-inch drop happened because something below the seafloor shifted its position. Not tectonic plates, not magma movement. Something adjusted, the way you adjust in a chair, and the seafloor above it flexed in response, and the water above that moved to compensate. A simultaneous 6-inch drop across every ocean on the planet, he said, required a single cause, not multiple causes in multiple locations. One thing, one movement, one source. He said he thought it had been doing that for a very long time in increments too small for any individual tide gauge or survey instrument to flag as unusual. This time, the adjustment was just large enough that every ocean showed the same loss at the same time, and that was too simultaneous to explain away. I thanked him and hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a while. The television was on. The refrigerator was making its usual sound. All the ordinary sounds of an ordinary house doing ordinary things. And I sat inside them and felt them the way you feel a coat that isn't quite warm enough. Then I drove to the coast. I parked on a boat ramp and sat in my truck and looked at the water. It was dark and the water was black, and the surface of it was flat and quiet under a clear sky. And I knew what I was looking at now in a way I hadn't that morning. I knew what was underneath it. Not the what of it, not what to call it, or what it was made of, or whether those questions even applied. Just the fact of it. The enormous, patient, lightless fact of it below every inch of water I could see, and below every coastline behind me, and below the ground under the boat ramp, and under the road I'd driven in on. I sat there until well past midnight. Then I drove home. There was one more job on the books, and I did it because I don't leave work unfinished. That's not a virtue exactly. It's just how I'm built. It was a deep pier foundation on the far end of the working harbour. Old structure, heavily used, last inspected 8 months before the drop. I went down the foundation line the way I always do, working through my check-in sequence, running the report in my head. I wasn't going to look at the seafloor. I finished my check on the lowest foundation section, and I was going to ascend, and I looked at the seafloor. Around the base of the pier, the sediment had pulled back from the concrete. Not much. A few inches of gap where the seafloor met the foundation edge, the kind of thing that happens to any structure that's been in the water long enough. Just normal settling and movement. I moved my light along it, checked the foundation edge where it was now exposed. I pointed my light into the gap between the foundation and the sediment. The gap went further down than it should have. I angled my light to find the bottom of it, and my light went into the gap and kept going and didn't find anything. Not the darkness of deep water, not the darkness of a space too large for my beam to cross. Something different. The way the inside of something looks dark when you're looking in through a narrow opening in the outer surface, and the interior is large enough that your light becomes irrelevant before it reaches anything. I held my position in the water and looked at it, and then the pulse came. Not through my hand this time, not through the sediment, through the water itself, arriving at my entire body simultaneously, the way a sound wave arrives, except this wasn't a sound. It was a pressure change, a slow, enormous wave of compression and release, moving up through the water column and passing through me from foot to head and continuing up. The same rhythm I'd felt with my hand on the sediment, the same deep, slow regularity of it, but bigger now. Bigger in the way that hearing something from the next room is different from standing inside the room with it. My whole body knew what to call it before I could stop it from calling it that. Something breathing. Something so large that one breath moved the water above an entire ocean floor. Something so slow that what I was feeling was just one moment inside a rhythm that had been going on since before the water was there to carry it. I surfaced. I got myself onto the boat. I stowed my gear. I told Lou the foundation was structurally sound and we should head in. She looked at me. Not a long look, not the kind of look that leads to questions, just a look that lasted one beat longer than normal, that said she saw something in my face she was choosing not to name, and then she turned and started the engine. We didn't talk on the way back in. The water went past on both sides, and I sat in the bow and watched it, and I thought about the word floor. I thought about how long I'd been using it. 20 years of saying seafloor like it was the most natural compound word in the language. Sea, floor, the floor of the sea, the bottom, the end of the depth, the place where the going down stops. I thought about what's on the other side of a floor. I thought about what's always been on the other side of this one. I'm still doing the work. That surprised me some, after everything. I thought I might stop, or take time away, or find that getting into the water was something I couldn't do anymore. The way some things become impossible after you learn something about them. But I didn't stop. I'm not sure I could. The water is where I know what I'm doing, and right now, knowing what I'm doing feels important. Reed came for a long weekend last month. We went fishing off the pier on the Saturday, the way we've been doing since he was small enough that I had to bait his hook for him and hold the rod with him while he waited for something to happen. We sat out there for 3 hours and talked about everything and nothing, and I watched him look at the ocean the way people look at the ocean when they're relaxed. That easy, unconscious look you give to something familiar and enormous, the comfortable human habit of finding large water calming. He doesn't know what's underneath it. I didn't tell him. I'm not going to tell him. There's nothing he could do with that information except carry it, and he's 17, and there will be enough things for him to carry without me handing him this one. The official explanation settled on large-scale seismic adjustment across multiple tectonic boundaries. A few scientific publications ran pieces on the unusual simultaneity of the event and noted it warranted further study. The water level hasn't gone back to where it was. Nobody in any official capacity has said it will. The explanation that gets used is adjustment, which is the word Pell used too, though what Pell meant by it was different from what the press releases mean by it. An adjustment means something that has a preferred position returning to it, something with a sense of its own size, a size it tends toward, and the movement toward that size is what everyone measured in their tide gauges and their ocean monitoring equipment and their news reports and called a sea level event. I think about the increments. I think about how long it's been doing this in amounts too small to notice, millimeters over centuries, a slow, ongoing settling into size that nobody's instruments were calibrated to catch because nobody was looking for it. I think about whether there's a record of it in the historical data, in the long records of tidal variation and coastline change that go back hundreds of years, whether it's in there and got attributed to the ice caps or the seasons or the gradual processes that everyone knew about and could explain. I think about how much of the ocean's entire recorded history is just a record of something breathing. I'm different at the water's edge than I was. I can feel the change in myself even when I can't see it from the outside. I still go in, I still do the work, but I hold myself differently down there now, with an awareness running underneath everything I do, a knowledge of what's below me when my fins are 4 feet off the seafloor and my light is on a section of steel I'm supposed to be checking. I'm always checking the steel. I'm always also aware of what's on the other side of the floor I'm hovering above. It's still there. Of course it's still there. It's been there since before the oceans filled in above it, since before there was anything on the surface worth noticing, since before the surface existed in any form that would recognize itself in what we have now. It was there before us in the same way a mountain was there before the first person looked at it, except the mountain knows. It's being looked at the way a mountain knows anything, which is not at all. I don't know if this knows. I don't know if knowing is something that applies to it the way it applies to things that are built on the scale that knowing seems to require. It might be that awareness isn't something it has, the way weather doesn't have awareness but still does what it does regardless of anything living inside it. I hope that's what it is. I spend more time hoping that than I'd like to admit. But I think about the pulse. I think about the rhythm of it, how even it was, how consistent the intervals. And I think about whether even and consistent intervals are something that happens without a reason, or whether they're the signature of something that is, in whatever way applies to something that size, alive. I don't let myself finish that thought all the way to the end. I stand at the water's edge in the evenings, and I look out at it, the flat surface of it in the late light, going from gold to grey to black as the sun goes down. The sound of it against the shore, the smell of it, the familiar weight of it in the air. I've spent 20 years at this water, and I know it the way you know a place you've worked your whole life. I know what it's sitting on top of now. I know that the seafloor isn't the bottom. It's never been the bottom. It's been a ceiling this whole time, stretched over something so large that the 6-inch movement the entire world noticed and reported on and issued statements about was nothing. A shift, a small change in position, the kind of adjustment you make without thinking, the kind your body makes 100 times a day just to stay comfortable. It adjusted. 6 inches of ocean moved. The whole world looked at the 6 inches of ocean. And what was underneath it, what's been underneath it since before any of us were here to notice the water sitting above it, went on doing what it's been doing. It'll adjust again. I don't know when. I don't think the when is the part I'm supposed to focus on. I think the part I'm supposed to focus on is the morning after it happens again, when the exposed strip of new seafloor is wider than the last time, and the smell coming off it is older than the last time, and the whole world's tide gauges are showing a number nobody wants to say out loud. And I'll be on a boat with Lou heading out to check what the change did to the foundations and the seawalls and the structures we've built on the assumption that the water would stay where we put it. I'll do the work. I'll go down there. And under my hands, through the water, through the sediment, through whatever is between me and the other side of the seafloor, the pulse will still be there. Slow and enormous and steady, the way it's always been, the way it'll keep being, long after the piers and the seawalls and the offshore platforms and the people who built them are gone, long after the water itself is gone. Whatever it is, it was here before the water. It'll be here after.